a list of some of the adaptations that leaves can have. And depends on where they live, how they're going to adapt to their environment, but how they design their leaves can be a big part of their adaptation process. And so I think some of these are pretty self-explanatory, and I have images that go with all of these, but there's a few I wanted to mention. I don't know if anyone, when you did your stem cuttings from the greenhouse plants, I don't know if any of you picked the snake plant, just often called, or mother tongue. If you did pick that one, I just wanted to mention you have to be patient for that one. So when you take a leaf cutting and you put it into soil, it takes quite a while. So don't think that it's dead or dying. It just takes a long time because first it's going to form the roots, and then the new leaves that come up, it takes a long time. So I've grown these many times, months usually, before you see any significant growth. So hang in there if you did do that. Tendrils, we can see tendrils, modified leaves actually can do a tendril type design similar to what we saw with stems. And so they can do that in multiple parts of their body in order to stay upright and hopefully get good access to sunlight. And wanted to mention these. This is a succulent. This is the window plant, window leaves plant, they're called. And so this one's been excavated so you can see it better, but in its real habitat in the desert, you would see only the top portion of the leaves. And so these leaves are amazing because they only have like that very top part sticking out of the sand. So they're mostly buried in the ground. And those top cells are very transparent. And so the sun comes down, and then the way the leaf is shaped is very kind of tunnel shaped or funnel shaped, I should say. And it allows for the light to come in and bounce around inside the leaves so that all the chloroplasts in there are getting adequate access to light, even though most of the plant is buried under soil because it's typically so hot where they are. They just bury themselves to stay cool and just have the tips of their leaves accessing the sunlight. So that's a cool adaptation. I think I already told you about this one with poinsettias. It's the actual flowers are these little tiny things that you see in the center, and then all of the what some people might say are the flower petals. Those are just modified leaves, and we tend to say bracts if they're bright like that and look like they're part of the flower design. So very good strategy if you are relying on a visual pollinator to come along and pollinate your plant. You want to be very flashy. This is another interesting one. So this is the flower, what are they, the flower pot plant, I think they call it, because its leaves will be hollow, so like the pot, and then they grow adventitious roots inside. And what happens is there's an opening toward the top, and you'll get insects crawling in there and debris falling in there and decaying, and then they can use that for nutrition. So kind of an interesting design. These are tropical plants that tend to be epiphytes where they hang out on other plants. And so that was an interesting strategy. Has anyone seen this one? I think I might have showed this one already. Mother of Thousands, very fun plant, very interesting because it clones all these little baby plantlets, replete with roots and everything hanging off the leaf, and those will break off and hopefully land somewhere suitable and start growing. And then we have lovely pitcher plants suited to bog environments, so their leaves are highly modified and cup-like, and they fill with water. They have downward-facing trichomes so that when insects crawl in, they tend to not be able to crawl out, and so they're stuck in there, and they end up usually dying and floating around in the water in there. And then with the help of microbes that hang out in water, the microbes help break down the insects, and the plant can then take advantage of the nutrition. I had a student in microbial ecology class that did that. They had to do independent research experiments, and he went to 3 different bogs in the area and collected water samples from carnivorous plants, and went into the lab and was hunting for what kind of microbes were coexisting with the plants. So really cool study with these pitcher plants. They have their own little community of microbes that are there to help them digest their food. Lots of different species. We have a few around here. So really interesting adaptation because, you know, boggy environments, they're pretty poor in nitrogen in general. There's not a lot of nitrogen in the environment. So eating away at insects that usually have high levels of nitrogen, that's a good source of nutrition. And then the beautiful sundew, very interesting adaptation again to capture their prey in a boggy environment again. We've already talked about these with the really highly modified leaves in order to do their job of capturing those insects that are clueless that they're about to be lunch. We don't have these around here, but these are acacia plants. And all those little yellow nubby things on the leaves are actually food for ants. And so the plant is making this, and you can see that it's brightly colored, so it catches the eye of the ants. And they come along, and it's very fat rich, lots of fats in there, and they can pick those off and eat them. And so it's a really good source of nutrition. And in return, the plants get something for this feeding of the ants. The ants will control the acacia plant and be essentially like an army for the acacia plant. And so Sir David Attenborough has some videos of those ants just kind of patrolling all day long across the branches and leaves of the plant. And they show video of, you know, if a nearby plant has some leaves or branches that start touching the acacia, the ants will go along and shoo that plant off, like, get off my plant. This is my plant. It needs to be free of any interference. Then they've also shown ants swarming insects that come along and try to chew on the plant. The ants will pester and chew at the insect to get the insect to go away. So it's really quite a nice adaptation for these plants, especially when you think about how many insects are in tropical areas that want to eat plants. Having your own insect army to defend yourself is a really, really good idea. So it's kind of a wonder more plants do this. They also have the ability to stand special like spines and areas sometimes down in their lower stem region where the ants will build their nests right in the plant and have a home as well. So they live right with the plant, literally in the plant, in the hollowed out regions. So really interesting mechanism. Okay, yes. No, I think the ants, they make it a home for themselves, put in some windows and doors. So really cool interaction though. Okay, the other thing that leaves are famous for is producing all kinds of chemicals that they use to defend themselves. And certainly humans have taken advantage of this, but we still have so much more to learn about all of these different secondary metabolites that the plants are making. And so basically from the plant's perspective, they're doing it most of the time, what they're doing in their leaves, they're trying to defend their leaf tissue. Obviously, it's pretty important part of their body. They need to be able to do photosynthesis, but you know, if you look at it from a herbivore's perspective, that's a pretty yummy spot of a plant to eat. And so it's this constant fight of trying to defend itself. And so producing all kinds of secondary metabolites that can be toxic to whatever herbivore might be coming along, or not just herbivores though, but also like bacteria and fungi. They do a fair bit of damage to leaf tissue as well. And so being able to defend against that. Lignin in and of itself is a pretty potent deterrent. It's not easy to digest. And so a lot of herbivores have issues with that and kind of dissuades them and wants them to move on and find a little bit juicier, easier thing to eat. And so lignin is just part of the secondary cell wall. It's just part of the plant body, but that can be effective. Trichomes can be storing secondary metabolites that can be toxic. Trichomes can also be very needle-like and be sharp. And so that can also be a deterrent. There's also, with some herbivores that chew on some plants, there could actually be hormones being produced by the plant that impact the animal chewing on them. So it's not a hormone the plant uses for itself. It's totally in defense mode. And there have been some studies, for example, with bracken fern plants. Bracken ferns are common in areas where people are trying to graze cattle. And they've shown that cattle can have a hard time with that, like pregnant cows, they can have a hard time, or can actually put the fetus at risk. And then there's a whole new kind of relatively new area of study where they're realizing that plants are able to send off chemicals and communicate with other plants nearby. And often it is a communication of, hey, I'm under attack and you're probably going to be next. And so they send off these volatile, very often volatile chemicals out of their leaves, out of their stomata, and that will warn a nearby plant that something's going on and they better start defending themselves, get ready. And when that information was first published, it was very much argued against. A lot of scientists said, no, you did this experiment wrong. There's something wrong with your experimental design. This can't be happening. And they did more careful experiments, published that one. And then they did a third one, published that one. And after that, it was kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, it is going on. And so now that has opened up like I said, a relatively new field of research looking at plant-to-plant communication and realizing that there's a whole lot of talking going on, so to speak. They just do it through largely through chemical means. So secondary metabolites, that's the word I was using. So these are, we say that word when we talk about chemicals, in this case, plant making certain chemicals that they don't use every day. It's like, like when they run their normal pathways to get their ATP and to build their tissues, that's primary metabolism. Secondary metabolism really only kicks in if they are doing something in response to what's happening around them. So it's usually getting under attack. If they're under attack, that's usually when we see them really ramping up their secondary metabolism. And so many of them are volatile, so we often refer to them as VOCs, volatile organic compounds. And these are some of the more heavily studied, the terpenoids, the alkaloids, glycosides, and glucosinolates. These are heavily studied, and there's over 250,000 flowering plants. That's just the flowering plants. And so those have been the most heavily studied, but now they're starting to turn their attention to gymnosperms and ferns as well. So it's not just the flowering plants that do this, but it's the one that is most heavily studied by humans. But there's different categories, chemical categories of these secondary metabolites. And boy, you could spend many semesters just studying this idea. And the list goes on and on and on. And so, depending on what plant you're talking about, it just depends. And then it's highly, highly dependent on what is attacking them. So we now know that plants can very precisely defend themselves. Like they won't just make all these secondary metabolites when they get attacked. They'll get attacked. So for example, they know when a certain species of caterpillar is chewing on them. They'll be able to detect that. And it's usually from the saliva of the caterpillar. They can sense that, and then they very, in a very pinpointed way, they will start to defend themselves against that insect. And so it's not like this shotgun approach where they just make a bunch of chemicals and hope something works. They are being very selective in their metabolic pathways just for that particular insect. And they do that with fungi, and they do that with bacteria too. It's not just. So these are probably some plants foxglove on the top left, lily of the valley. Those are actually fairly poisonous. If you have dogs or cats that roam around your yard, kids, you should not have those. My mom loved lily of the valley and couldn't have our dogs near them. We had to be very careful about that. So just be aware that there are quite a few landscape plants and plants that you might have in your home, potted plants that can be dangerous if you're pet or young child. Choose on it. That lower left is some latex oozing out of the stem. If you damage it, sometimes they'll ooze out latex in defense as well, because that can be very toxic. And then this lower right image is dogbane, which again can be used. Some people will use it for landscaping. So certainly leaves, just like stems and even roots, can be economically important. We've taken good advantage of lots of different leaves, of course, for food. But also, you know, like I said, the secondary metabolites, we eat a lot of them in spices, oils. Certainly tea is a huge one. But we also extract fibers from the larger leaves in particular, and some beautiful natural dyes. Natural dyes are coming back into vogue now in the fashion industry because it's much more environmentally friendly and cheaper to make. So lots of options to think about when you look at economic importance. Carnauba is a wax. If you have a car and like to wax your car, you probably are using Carnauba wax. We're looking at the Yerrit plant in South America as a source of fuel production. Aloe vera, of course, always good to have aloe vera in your kitchen. I always have one in my kitchen windowsill because I burn myself so much when I cook. So cracking open one of those and putting it onto the burn can be very, very soothing, and it helps your skin heal. Symbols. So let's see. There's a couple of sports teams that use leaves as their kind of symbol on their jerseys. There's a basketball team out east. Can you think of which one that might be? Professional basketball. Yep, Boston Celtics. They have the 4-leaf clover, right? And then there's a hockey team in Canada, National Hockey League. Toronto Maple Leafs. It's even in their name. So I thought that was pretty cool that they had sports teams named after plant leaves. So essential oils is big. We're going to try to extract some essential oils in lab. We can see how your mint plants are doing. I don't know why we're having such a hard time with our mint plants. I am just stymied because I have mint in my garden and it's like this. Yeah, they're all over the place. If you don't grow them in pots in your garden area, they're just going to take over. So last semester, I cut down a bunch of my mint and brought them in for class because we didn't have any and we needed to use them in 2 different classes. So I just harvested the stuff in my garden. But this, I don't have that option. So we're going to, we did plant another batch, didn't we? There was another batch of mint seeds that came in. They're still not doing it. Well, we'll see. We'll see what we can do about that. We're gonna hopefully, we might not be able to fit it in this week. Obviously, if we don't have any, maybe there's some other option. I'll go shopping and find some aromatic. Usually mint is like really easy, so I'm a little bit confused. But essential oil is becoming more and more popular. It's a pretty big business. I see more and more people offering this online. And, you know, I think there is a lot to it in terms of aromatherapy, but also for medicinal purposes. I think there are a lot of really good uses for humans in terms of essential oils. And that's something you can learn. One of the reasons we are trying to incorporate that into this class, it's not that hard to do. And so we were hoping to show you a couple of methods that you could do to make your own essential oil if you want to do that. Wormwood, that plant in and of itself has a long history, long history of many, many different uses. Absinthe used to be really big in the Victorian era, still so big. If you're over 21, you could try that, but it is also known as the green fairy. That's what it's called. It has very high alcohol content, so you got to be really, really careful. Wormwood contains the chemical thujone, which is a secondary metabolite, which can cause seizures and death in high concentrations. Thujone is a GABA inhibitor, so maybe that's why they call absinthe the green fairy. So many people might have died from it. I don't know. But there is not enough thujone in absinthe to kill you or make you go into convulsions, but the high alcohol content might kill you. So, so they've used wormwood over the centuries for a variety of issues. I'm wondering if it might have just been like back in the day. Yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, I think it might have just been the high alcohol content. Not had any, by the way. But I don't know if that might have caused people to kind of, go into an altered state, I suppose. Emmenagogue, I don't even know if that's the way to pronounce it, but that's for menstrual issues. Cholagogue, increased blood flow of the, or increased flow of bile. I mean, they have all kinds of ideas for why wormwood was being used. So kind of a famous plant in several regards. Tea, of course, huge billion-dollar industry. And so we're growing the plant leaves for that. And I think at least some of the readings I've done, I've been looking a lot more into teas just for personal use. And chamomile, actually, they say has one of the highest of all the teas, at least in some of the studies that they published. Chamomile has the highest antioxidant profile. And so if you like chamomile, that's a really good reason to drink it. What do we get from agave? Tequila. Boy, we're talking about liquor today. So lovely tequila. And so very long process. I listened to a podcast on how tequila is made and how long you have to wait for these plants to flower and do their thing so that you can do the harvesting. And you have to have some patience and have some nice plantations of these agave plants to keep making a living off of it. So I've actually not seen an agave plantation, but I imagine they're quite large. So they don't flower very often. So foxglove. So digitalis, by the way, you might know, hopefully you don't know anyone your age, but you might know someone older that might be taking digitalis. And that's actually extracted from the foxglove. And it is to regulate your heartbeat. And it's a very successful drug. I'm sure they make millions off of that. And then, of course, cannabis, because of all of the legalization going on across the country, the upswing and being able to do proper research now is very exciting. I think that we can actually do the research on this and get some real data and not just anecdotal things that you hear about, but with no experimental design. So lots of options for what cannabis can be used for. And so the popularity is gaining. Carnauba wax. And then the symbols that I mentioned. So this is a weird plant. And again, when this came out, it was totally, people went into an uproar about it and said, no, this cannot be happening. So a group of scientists were in South America and found this Opila tranquiliolata. It's a vining plant that vines around other plants, including trees. And it mimics a plant that it's usually climbing. And so it can morph its leaf design in real time, like within the span of its own lifetime. It doesn't pass it on to the next generation per se. So as it's growing its vine, and so the vine is growing longer and longer, and you can have parts of the vine on one tree, parts of the vine than another tree with two different leaf designs, you will see two different leaf designs on this plant. It's super bizarre.
Is that
They don't know. They don't know. It's so, and I'm like, keep waiting for this group of scientists to publish on it. They've had some wild ideas on how the plant is doing this, including horizontal gene transfer, which I don't think that's happening, but they need to do more careful studies. And they've done studies in the lab where they, like, you know, they have like a tree trunk, but they defoliate that tree and it'll just show like its normal growth leaf pattern. And then they'll show, you know, different plants that it's vining around, and it morphs.
so it doesn't even work. Plants on doesn't have,
It'll grow a leaf,
but it'll grow
its own leaf.
but only with that plant.
Yes. Yes.
That's crazy.
So they're showing this mimicry idea. Yes.
They kind of ruled out horizontal gene transfer because in their lab they were showing that it did artificial.
Yeah.
They just put like artificial transfer.
Yes. Yes. And so it's a fake leaf dead.
How would it know?
Exactly, right? Isn't that bizarre? It just blew my mind when I read this article. So this is a couple published articles on it. When I teach my advanced botany class, we get into this quite a bit. But I think one of the leading hypotheses is that it's sensing light dark because of the leaf pattern nearby. It's somehow sensing a light dark pattern, like shading light pattern, I should say, and somehow is using that to alter its shape. And that's one of the leading hypotheses. So it's bizarre. And, you know, from the plant's perspective, it kind of is trying to camouflage itself, right? So it's trying to fit in and not be conspicuous, they think, to avoid herbivory, you know, so that they won't get, because their leaves are fairly nutritious and they may be more nutritious than nearby plants. And so it kind of makes sense from that perspective if you blend in like, hey, I'm just, you know, I'm just this tree that's not so nutritious, so don't chew on me. But in reality, when they analyze their nutritional profile, they are fairly nutritious compared to other plants that they can coexist with. So these images are showing the some of the experiments that they did or found when they were traipsing through the woods, or the tropical forest, I should say. So V is the vine and T is the tree. And so you can see how similar, I mean, look at the difference in the overall shape. Just when you look at the V, you can see depending on the plant, their shape is different. So this is within that plant's life, it's doing it. And so it's able to do this kind of on the fly as it's growing and living. So I keep waiting for them to come out with more data on what they think is going on. So they're in my advanced botany class. We do talk about the idea of, can plants, do they have their own version of vision? And some scientists say yes, they have their own way of perceiving vision. Now they don't have eyeballs, but there are other organisms that do have vision that don't have eyeballs. And so algae, even some bacteria. So it's weird to think about, but when you look up the definition of what is vision, it can fit more than just having an eyeball. And so anyways, very, very interesting things to think about. So leaves are incredibly diverse in shape. Sometimes they can shapeshift within the lifespan of one plant. We also learned too that, you know, very young plants, one leaf shape very commonly, and then as they get into mature phase, they can change. But this vining leaf is probably the outlier in the case of how dramatic it can change its leaves. And of course, leaves give us plenty of beauty through the fall season, of course, and just even during the summer too. Very, very a beautiful aspect of our environment. So lots of research still going on with all the metabolites they produce, but there's also a lot of beauty there too, and amazing abilities. Okay, so that was the last bit of the leaves that I can fit in for this class. but now I wanted to shift a little. So what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to get into the fungi next because you're going to be covering that in lab. I ordered some fungal growing kits, mushroom growing kits. So we're going to learn how to grow edible mushrooms. That's always fun. I do that at home. I have it right on my kitchen and watch them grow. And I'm trying to brainwash my boys into eating mushrooms, but so far they don't like the texture. How about you all? Do you eat mushrooms? I know some people, okay, some are no, most are yes. I know the texture can be a little bit off-putting. Somebody told me, like blend it up and putting it into a soup. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. But my boys currently really don't like soup, so I'm kind of like, maybe chili. Yes, they are. They're so picky. I suppose you were all never that picky, right? When you were teenagers. No. Trying to feed them is like, I'm hungry. All right, so I'm going to get into the fungi. So what I thought I'd do is we'll get into fungi. And so also I want to kind of weave in a little bit more about the soil as we talk about fungi. But for today, since the lab is coming up, I want to kind of focus in on the fungi. And then since fungi mostly live in the soil, I do want to talk to you a little bit more about soil and how plants are working with the soil, because we didn't really get a chance to do that because I was that far behind in lecture. So let me see what I can do on that. All right, so fungi are also having their big time, and it is so fun for me. I love fungi, so to see this interest in like the common population of people out there living their lives, more and more people are getting very interested in fungi, and they should, because fungi are amazing and they can be very helpful for us in terms of our own nutrition, but also they're very good for our environment. If you've heard of Paul Stamets, you might have seen his TED video. It's several years old now. I think the title of it is How Mushrooms Are Going to Save the World. Obviously, he loves mushrooms and fungi, but Paul Stamets is kind of like a one-man band when it comes. Well, not anymore, but he was. He was like the only one out there really saying, "Pay attention to fungi," and now a lot of people are. So he must be very, very happy. He lives out west and has his own business called Fungi Perfecti, and I've often bought. They used to sell those kits we're going to work with in lab, but they stopped selling those and have branched into other ideas. So one of the things I want to talk about fungi first is that they are well known to be endophytes. So they live inside the plant tissue, and the bacteria do as well, though. So it's really, when you say the word endophyte, you're thinking about fungi and bacteria. And so I think I've already talked to you a little bit when we looked at tissue culture ideas, that you can have those endophytes in the section of the plant that you put onto the tissue culture. And if they grow out onto the media, if they stay in check, it's okay. But if they overwhelm, sometimes an artificial system, the microbes can get a little too happy and overgrow the system, so it can be a problem. But so that is something that you can see. So under normal conditions, you look at a normal plant, not tissue culture processes, but a normal plant living its life. So far, every plant that's been investigated has some kind of endophytes in them, and they're multiple different species. So it's not something unusual, only one certain plant or one group of plants, every plant. And so they are in the plant living their life, typically not in the cells of the plant. They're not living in the cytoplasm, swimming around. That would kick off a defense response by the plant. What they do is they live in the tissue. All right, so they're not invading the cells, they're just in the tissue. Okay, and so they're not causing disease, they're not triggering a defense response. And now we know they're doing all kinds of good things for the plant, just like all the microbes, the good microbes in us on a day-to-day basis are doing all kinds of good things for us. So very, very similar idea here. They have their own microbiome, just like humans do and other animals. So it's a win-win, really, because fungus is getting shelter. They're getting a very homeostatic environment where things kind of stay the same temps in general. They have access to nutrients. And then the plant is known to get all kinds of things, depending on what endophyte you're studying. They are, the list is increasing for sure in terms of what they do. I'm very interested in endophytes in their ability to help the plant defend itself against pathogens. Very interested in that, and again, studies on that. And then we also know that endophytes, I don't know if it, oh yeah, the increased mineral nutrients, that would help the plant just get its own nutritional needs met. And then they also show that plants that have a good suite of endophytes in them, the nutritional profile of the plant part that we eat can also be increased. I'm very interested in that. How do we grow food that's more nutritionally dense? Per gram of tissue, it's better nutrition for us. And so with less land to do that, another strategy is to make food more nutritious. So endophytes are known to do that. So the list, this is not a complete list. This is just some ideas to get you thinking. So they're in the plant body. They have to get in there somehow. And so often, you know, think about like, how would they get in? Very often, stomata might be a good option, right? They could get in that way so that they know that that can happen. But even like as roots are growing, for example, sometimes they can get into cracks and crevices in the root tissue quite readily. If you can imagine, you know, roots growing in a very abrasive soil, you're going to have some cracks and maybe some small wounds that microbes, because they're so tiny, they can easily get in. And so the other idea is that they come with in the seed. And this research is really taking off. A lot of people are looking at this. You know, how these different plant species, like what kinds of endophytes do they have? What happens if they don't have endophytes? You try to work with those seeds. So this is the seed biology really getting into this. And they're even starting to say that even microbes on the surface of seeds, like typically you're taught when you get seed, you have to surface sterilize them before you plant them, especially if you're going to do significant like acres and acres of growing. They say to do that. And now there's some scientists saying, maybe we shouldn't, because those surface microbes are also could be helping that when that seed germinates, could be helping that baby plant better adjust to its environment. It's like a legacy handed down from the mother plant. And so again, it's coming, these endophytes are coming from the mother plant. What that mother plant experienced, the endophytes that plant had are able to get into, migrate into the seed as it's being formed. So it's actually in the seed. So you can surface sterilize seeds, but you'll still have endophytes inside. You'll never get rid of all the microbes. And some people are now saying maybe we shouldn't be even surface sterilized. So very interesting idea. And so the other thing to think about too is to realize that they can move around in the leaf, in the plant body. And so, for example, they're showing the green is I think this is a bacteria that they were tracking. And figure A is in the root. And so basically they took all of these confocal images and they were showing that the bacteria was able to migrate, got in through the root and was able to migrate all the way up to the leaf tissue. And so that's another way, you know, that they don't have to come through the stomata necessarily. They can actually come in through the root and work their way through the plant body. So they're not limited to where they first get in. They do have the ability to migrate, so to speak. And we'll be asking you to watch a DVD documentary by Dr. Strobel. And his nickname is the Indiana Jones of the fungus hunters. So he is one of the first scientists, PhD level scientists, that again was a one-man band for endophytes. He was saying we have to pay attention to these endophytes, we have to study them, we have to better understand them. And what he did was basically traveled around the world to different locations and took plant samples and sent them back to his lab in Montana and isolated all these different endophytes, many of which were fungi. and then he would study them and look for interesting capabilities. And so, some of the, if he hit on something big, he would take that back to the community that he isolated the plant from and share in the profits from that. So he, unfortunately, he's retired now, unfortunately. So I don't know, his son works out east. I think maybe at the University of Connecticut. And, but I don't know how much he's into endophytes. I'm not sure. I know he was dabbling in it, but I don't know if he's fully into it. So, kind of sad that he had to retire, but I guess everyone's got to do it sometime. So probably the most famous example of an endophyte providing a benefit to humans is Taxol. So this is actually being produced by a fungal endophyte. And so the story was that they discovered in the bark of yew trees this drug that could put breast cancer into remission. And so then they started cutting down yew trees. Crazy. I mean, just, and so everyone was like, you're going to make our yew trees go extinct if you keep this up. So Dr. Strobel and a colleague from Canada said, hey, what if it's not just the tree doing it, or what if it's not even the tree doing it? What if it's a fungus? And so they went to the yew trees and took samples. Sure enough, it was a fungus in the bark tissue that was producing the scientific name is paclitaxel, but the drug common name is Taxol. And it's incredibly potent for a certain type of breast cancer. It can put it into remission. So this is, probably $1 billion drug because it's so, and you can see how challenging that would be, at least from my perspective. I'm not huge into chemistry, but it seems like that would be kind of challenging to do synthetically. So once they figured out a fungi can do this, it's pretty easy to grow fungi in huge vats in a liquid culture and get them to create this chemical. You have to understand how to feed them, so they'll pump out this chemical, and then you can extract it and purify it. So endophytic fungi, that was probably the most famous example. But since then, there have been, primarily with Dr. Strobel's work, a lot of other chemicals that are being discovered. And so his big push is we need more people doing this because we know next to nothing about endophytes and what they're capable of, not just for the plant, but how we might use them to improve human and animal health, the environment, and the list goes on. And so these are different agar plates of different fungi, very beautiful growth patterns here. And so he has discovered many, primarily fungal endophytes, but they're discovering that many endophytes, like a single endophyte, can make several different kinds of chemicals that can be very useful for us. And so sometimes the fungal endophyte makes some of the same chemicals the plant makes, but often the fungal endophyte makes chemicals that the plant does not. And so in that regard, it's like this partnership where the fungus is like, well, I'll make these chemicals to do this for you, whether it's to protect the plant or increase its nutrition or help it deal with, high temps or drought. And so that way the plant won't have to invest resources into making that chemical. The endophyte's doing it for them. And so very, very interesting. So if you ever go into a career path where you're isolating and extracting chemicals from plants, please keep in mind that it could be endophytes that are actually doing this. And if you start to see discrepancies like, geez, this plant used to produce this chemical and now it's not doing it, think about endophytes. Maybe the endophytes got lost somewhere along the way, or that particular endophyte stopped producing or died off. And if you can say, hey, I think an endophyte might be actually making that chemical, they're much easier to work with in a lab setting than growing plants. They take up far less space. Usually you can extract drugs from them quite readily. And usually you can grow up high numbers of biomass very, very quickly. So if you can work with the endophyte rather than the plant to do your extraction, whatever you're going for, if the endophyte is really doing that. And so Dr. Strobel, one of his published papers was, when a plant species disappears, so too does its entire suite of associated endophytes. So he was a big proponent of, stop cutting down all the tropical rainforests. And not only are we losing the trees, but countless endophytes with them. And, I think that's such an important concept that most people have no clue that plants have microbes living in them. Okay. So next time we're going to get into how fungi can also be symbiotic in other ways besides being endophytes. We'll get into mycorrhizal fungi next, but we'll do that on Wednesday.